Hi, friends. Thank you for joining us today at Food for Thought. This is a pre-recorded show. We're doing it actually on Friday night in order to be able to interview our guest, who is an amazing young man who is a historian. Zachary Garceau is his name, and he has interned at Babcock Smith House. He's an archivist at Westerly Historical Society. He was born in Westerly, and what's really important and interesting, one of the important and interesting things about him is that he loves history, and he loves, in particular, history around the time of the 1918s, when America was hit with another pandemic at that time. And so today we're going to be talking with him about what he has learned about that pandemic, which is commonly referred to as the Spanish flu, but he might open to us a little bit about what the history of that event and how Westerly has responded to it, and how we might respond to our present day pandemic. And I'm so very happy to have met him. I met him right before our show, but I'm looking forward to getting into a deep conversation with him. So, Ben, if you would invite Zachary, it would be great.
Hello.
Hi, Zachary. How are you?
Hi, good, Father. How are you?
I'm doing great. First off, I just want to say I love the color of your walls. It's red. Is that?
Thank you. I think it's called antique brick red, which is actually pretty appropriate for the office where I do a lot of the history work. So, yeah.
You know, it's interesting because all of my most interesting guests, and all of them are really wonderful. There have been wonderful guests, but some of them really interesting ones have the red background. You know, this presiding bishop had something like Caliente red, like that. But anyway, I'm really grateful that you're here with us today. I know that this show, I hope I told you at the very beginning, we started it in response to the global pandemic that we have. It was a way to connect with my parishioners, and also in this platform, we're able to now connect with a larger audience. In fact, you'll find that we are connecting to people all over the world, and all over our country, of course, but all over the world. And so it's a real wonderful way of connecting to people, to give them a sense of hope and during this present challenge. And what better way to understand how to deal with a present challenge by understanding how our nation, our country, our world has dealt with a previous challenge similar to this. And so, Zachary, how did you get into this history about the pandemic of the 1918s?
So it actually is. I do a lot of local history writing for some different places online, and actually, I had kind of given some thought to this idea because it's so topical and relevant to what we're going through today. But someone actually had suggested to me, hey, why don't you write about this? And, the more research I did and realized how much was out there, it just kind of came together for me. And I realized it really would make a good article to be writing about, and to kind of, teach people a little bit more about how, over a century ago, some of the responses to a pandemic really weren't all that different from how they are today, in a lot of ways.
So it's interesting because you were talking to me a little bit about the Spanish flu and how it became named. And could you tell us a little bit about that history?
So it's actually interesting how that name came about. Is a lot of people even today will refer to it as the Spanish flu, because in 1918, the U.S. was very much still in the throes of World War I, but Spain was actually a neutral country. So a lot of the local newspapers would report on news stories for there as to not really give too much attention either to the war or to, some of the things going on the opposing sides. So it really, to a lot of people in the United States, it seemed as though Spain was harder hit than most other countries, which really, in retrospect, turned out to not be true. And also, the King of Spain at the time, Alfonso XIII, actually came down with the influenza virus as well. And there was a lot of reports, and they actually thought for quite a while that he wasn't going to survive. So that was a story that persisted in the news for a while, and it just came to be known as the Spanish flu in this country. And even in Westerly, one thing I noticed was you can, if you look, unfortunately, at the death records, when they give a cause of death, it starts out by saying influenza, and then eventually there's a switch over, and it suddenly starts saying Spanish influenza for everyone that succumbed to it. So you can definitely tell when there's a switch over and when that name became more popular in the country.
So when did it hit Westerly? Was it immediately in 1918 or?
So they actually, and this is how it goes with a lot of pandemics, is that it kind of came in waves, where there was one wave, and this was the first one when it first came to the United States, which was early 1918, I believe. It actually first was seen in the US, and I think it was February or March of 1918. But that really, that wave didn't really come to Westerly, and you really don't see anyone being affected by it. But in the fall, there was yet another wave of 1918, and that's actually the worst of the several waves that hit Westerly, was that one. And then it kind of abated for a little while, and you could see in late November, early December, it really wasn't talked about much. And then shortly after Christmas of 1918, it came back with a vengeance, and then there was another large wave, and then it became more of a seasonal issue. In 1920, there was another wave, but that one, again, they tended to become less and less impactful each time. But in October of 1918, that's really when it started to hit Westerly, probably the hardest of any year.
Wow. So that's interesting, because we're in our country, we're thinking we just went through a first wave, and now we're waiting for a second wave in the fall, most likely. And were there any things that Westerly folks in Westerly, how do they mitigate the effect of these of this virus, or did they do anything to prepare themselves?
So there was actually a lot that was done in Westerly, and that's one of the reasons that even though there were a lot of cases in town, they weren't nearly as bad as they were in a lot of other places in the state and in the country. So initially there was some talk when there were first few cases. It was reported that there wasn't a quarantine, and that was kind of brought up, but it was very quickly turned around, and they shut down the schools, theaters, and also the children's department in the library. Eventually, the whole library was closed. But and it's actually one thing that I found interesting, and this actually differs significantly from what we're going through now, is you'd think that it would be interesting that they would shut down the children's department. Because one thing that I noticed is a lot of if you take the average age of death from the pandemic in 1918, it came to 26.8 years. So it really was affecting people who were much younger, who were not even middle-aged. They were under 30. So it really was impacting a much younger generation than what we're seeing today, where we're being told that a lot of the most vulnerable people are people who are much older. So this was a bit different. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of the locations that were shut down were places that might affect children more. And also the saloons in town were ordered to have the patrons, who were mostly men at that time, they had to, I guess you'd call it an early version of social distancing, where they were told that they couldn't congregate together, but then there were also soda fountains, and a lot of those were at pharmacies, but those are ordered to be shut down immediately, which kind of caused a lot of questions in town why bars could be opened, but pharmacies had to be shut down. So that was kind of an issue that they ran into, and people were kind of questioning that. And eventually both were shut down for safety reasons. And one thing that I actually, in our brief conversation before, brought up was there was also discussion of people being asked to wear masks when they were helping the sick. And it wasn't so much when people went out in public at that time, but it's also, I would say that that's largely attributed to the fact that our understanding of germ theory really wasn't where it is today. If it was, I'm sure that they'd be advising people wear masks more often, but it's still interesting that people were being asked to wear masks, and the Red Cross actually came in and was helping to make them and to distribute them in town.
It's interesting that you say that, because even though they didn't have the science as much as science as advanced as we do today, there was a sense, it seems like, that you knew the direction of how to protect your people, with the wearing of a mask. I was talking to our parish administrator, Jackie Smith, whom you know and who helped you to be on the show. She's a historian herself, and we were talking a little bit about fashion a little bit, and maybe you might give us some insight to this. But we noticed that people, that women, in the late 19th century and into the 20th century, are wearing gloves. Could this be something to, it seemed like a fashion, a thing that it's fashionable to wear these gloves, but could it be something to prevent the passing on of germs, or,
that's interesting, and that's not really something that was really brought up, and I almost wonder if that could be because it wasn't as well known. But at the same time, if people were recommending the wearing of masks, they clearly understood ways that this could be mitigated. So that's interesting, and I do actually wonder if that had a larger role in this. And I didn't really notice if there was a bigger divide between if it impacted men or women more. So I actually am not too sure about that. But it's actually interesting that you bring that up, though, because there is another thing that was done in town that it wasn't necessarily to help to stop the spread of this, but to help people move in town and actually to help with the treatment of people who were infected. Is there was a group called the Women's Motor Corps that was formed, and they would actually help to drive doctors, nurses, and any other emergency personnel to and from hospitals and to different homes. And they would be on call 24/7, driving people back and forth. And that was one of the biggest groups that was the most helpful in that first wave in October of 1918. And actually, I recall reading in early 1919, they were called on again because they were so helpful that first time around, that they were asked to come back and to help when things started to get a little more rough once again. So that I thought was one of the more interesting things, that they formed that group, and they were so instrumental in helping the doctors in town.
Yeah, that's interesting. What was the name of that group? So
it was the Women's Motor Corps. And also the Westerly, it was called the Sanitary Corps at the time, but it became the Westerly Ambulance Corps. A lot of the people who worked for them actually were part-time and were volunteer. But because things became so difficult, a lot of the people who volunteered for there actually quit their day jobs and dedicated themselves full-time to working to help stop the spread. And that was definitely necessary, because at one point there was actually reports that doctors were getting up to 100 calls a day from people who needed treatment. So it was pretty much around the clock for a lot of these doctors. And actually, another interesting thing about the ambulance corps was that the town council actually held a meeting and made the members of the sanitary corps our volunteer constables, and they were charged with going around town to especially areas that were harder hit and stopping people from entering homes where there was someone who they knew was sick, or just trying to stop people from being out on the streets and doing things that could spread this virus. So it's interesting that the members of the ambulance corps were made into police officers to help with that as well.
That is interesting, and I also think something that I think is very laudable is that you have people who are in Westerly who are seeking to help other people, and so much so that they've volunteered their time to drive these doctors to maybe even endanger themselves, put themselves at risk of getting the influenza, or I think that says something to me about Westerly and the people of Westerly.
Definitely. And, it really, the more that you read about this, the more you really see it's a community effort, and it was then and it is now. But so there were people from all age groups. They actually talk a little bit about how there were retired doctors and nurses who came out of retirement to help treat people. And also children got involved, I found. And there were children under 15 years of age, they said, both boys and girls, who would work for the power companies going around reading meters in Westerly and New London. So children, since they weren't in school, I think that they found that it might be easier to kind of almost have a temporary workforce of sorts. And that was really important and was really necessary because from things I read, a lot of times the police force was pretty hard hit and a lot of people weren't working. And also Washington Trust, they said at one point they had 12 employees who were sick at once and they had to call back retired employees. So a lot of industries in town were pretty hard hit and really needed all the help they could get. So the fact that it was a community effort was really important.
Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting that, the one thing about Westerly that I've noticed, so I've been here only 6 years now, 5, closer to 6 now, 2014. One of the things that it's a very close-knit community. And when people love you, they love you. They really do what they can to help you, and they help each other. And so it's kind of like this idea of even like a family. When someone can't do something, well, you just come in and help. You just do what you can to help them do what they need to do. It's beautiful.
Definitely.
Have you done any? So, like, I'm a priest, right? And I have, and our church is Christ Episcopal Church. I will make a promise to you that I will look into our vestry notes at the time from 1918, because we've got notes ending to the beginnings of our church here. Mm-hmm. Did you get in your reading of history? As Christ Church, do you know anything about the churches and the church communities and how they responded?
Interestingly, that didn't actually come up all that much. I did find at one point that there was mention that services were canceled, and I think that was actually throughout town. I don't know that it was on a church by church basis, because it was interesting that that was one of the larger gatherings, I guess you'd say, in town at the time. I mean, especially if they had closed down the theaters, the library, and the school, the churches were really the only other place in town where you could possibly imagine at that time people would be gathering. So I don't know exactly how they had handled that. And I'd actually be really interested to see what there are in the notes from the vestry, because I did look at some notes for some local businesses and other places that we have at the Historical Society, and it's actually kind of shocking to me how little was mentioned. It was mentioned in certain places. The Historical Society, I noticed that there were a couple months when, for example, November, they wrote, oh, our October meeting was canceled due to influenza. But aside from that, it was interesting that it really wasn't mentioned, which, given how strongly it impacted the community, it's kind of odd to me in some cases that it wasn't talked about more. But that also may be because the people who were most impacted by it weren't able to really have that voice if they weren't really leaving their home. I found in a diary from a 15-year-old girl who was actually from Mystic, but given how close it was, I could see that, a lot of the similarities and overlap. She mentioned that, or actually, I'm sorry, no, it was somebody from Westerly. It was an account by a man named Dr. Spicer. When he was a child, his mother actually had it, and she was bedridden for 3 weeks. So in a way, I guess, the people who are most impacted by it, if they weren't leaving their house, that could be why it wasn't always as brought up in some of these places.
You might, if you look at of course, you're invited to come and check out. We have our own historian. I mean, we have a number of people who are very much interested in the history of our church. Lita McKetty is very interested in, is kind of like our church historian, along with Jackie. Jackie's amazing in this work. But you might be able to, it's interesting that one way to look at it is the Sunday school. If this was an influenza that hit children, then how, our Sunday school at that time was very large, and how did it impact them? What, there might be even sermons. I don't know. The priest probably would have engaged in figuring out what it is that, his people would need at that time to help them through the struggle. And so vestry notes, sermons, notes from our Sunday school, all open to you if you'd like to come and check it out.
Okay, I would definitely be interested. That would be great. Because like you said, there's a lot of different aspects of it that I think would really shed a lot more light on how in Westerly it was handled in different segments of the community even. So, I mean, because a lot of what I found was in newspaper articles, but these firsthand accounts are really just fantastic, and that would be great.
And for me, for me, history is very interesting in that it helps me to kind of helps me to understand a community, right? And helps me to identify what are the things that the community needs to deal with a particular needs in order to deal with a particular challenge. And then we might be at this time in our history, we might then look back at it and say, hey, look, the folks in Westerly, when they first met up with this grand global challenge, what they did was they dug deep. They found the resiliency by helping one another, helping them also to understand that the challenges that they faced was, over a year to 2 years. In this, it might seem at that time, it might have seemed like an eternity, but as we look back into history, 1 to 2 years, even though it's a long time, it's not forever,
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're facing our own situation, we've been here now for about 3 to 4 months, right? And it may last for several more months. But the idea being that there is an end point to this, and we will get through it. It's just how we get through it is important, and it says something about who we are as a people.
Oh, certainly. And I mean, I think that was my biggest takeaway from this was, like you said, the community aspect and how everybody did what they could to help others in the community. And it's just the fact that people of all age groups and all walks of life, really, it seems, came together and did what they could in different ways. And, I think that says a lot about the town. And I think it's really a great lesson to take away from this, is that, like you said, we can get through this. And, there's a great example from the past of, here's basically a blueprint for how to do that, is have everybody do what they can, contribute how you can, and just, care for one another. And I think that that's a great way to look at this. And I think, it forms a really good basis for what we're going through today.
Great. Zachary, I'm so glad that we met and we spoke. We haven't met in person. I'm looking forward to one day meeting you in person, but I just love the fact that I could see this energy and passion that you have, and it's a beautiful thing. And I hope that God blesses you with continued passion, and so that you could glean out the wisdom from history, so that we might be able to use it in our present day and into the future. So I thank you. I'm grateful for you to be spending your half hour with us, and hope that you will take my invitation to come and check out our records and read and just learn about who we are, because we've been a part of the fabric of this community since the inception of Christ Church.
Oh, I certainly will. You'll be hearing from me. Don't worry. So I appreciate giving me the opportunity to talk about everything that I have been working on, reading about, and to share that with you today. So thank you so much for having me. And thank you again. Appreciate it.
God bless you.
All right, you too. Thank you, Father.
This is beautiful. It's just another example of great people here in Westerly. I didn't talk to Zachary a little bit about the Westerly way, but I think he kind of talked a little bit about how that Westerly way, a way of loving and caring and helping, is a part of the fabric of our community, and not just in the recent past, but over 100 years ago, and maybe even longer than that. It's, I think, part of the DNA of the cultural DNA of our community, and I'm so glad that he was able to help us bring that insight out. We're almost at the end of our time together, and what we usually do is say this prayer, written by Bishop Thomas Brown of Maine. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Jesus Christ, you traveled through towns and villages, curing every disease and illness. At your command, the sick were made well. Come to our aid now in the midst of the global spread of the coronavirus. Heal those who are sick with the virus. May they regain their strength and health through quality medical care. Heal us from our fear, which prevents nations from working together and neighbors from helping one another. Be present with those in authority who are making hard decisions. Support the medical professionals, emergency responders, teachers and students, counselors and caregivers, and historians. We ask this all in your name, Jesus. Amen. Join with me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Friends, go in peace and spread the light of God, the light of hope, to the world around us. The world needs it right now. Thank you.